ladies, it's a bit hard to follow the incredible act of wonderful speakers we had this morning, so I'm going to try my utmost to bring you through a journey of empathy, an understanding of the fact that this is no longer just about climate change, but this is actually about much more than that. At the Club of Rome, we've known that for 50 years we are risking collapse. And I think what's incredibly important here is the fact that we already showed that there would be different scenarios of alternative futures in 1972. That those scenarios of different futures, as you see here, demonstrated that actually with continued population growth and the impact of the use of natural resources, the impact within finite boundaries, we would in the 2020s already start to feel some real shocks and stresses to our way of life. Lo and behold, here we are. We are in 2023, speaking about what we spoke about this morning, but also obviously juxtaposing all of that, those geopolitical conflicts with climate change and coming out of a pandemic. I want to bring in something that's very important here, and coming from the wise words of Donella Meadows, who was one of the authors of that incredible report, The Limits to Growth, already 50 years ago, who I call the mother of systems thinking. And what she says is that we need to have leverage points. We need to understand what are the anchors of change that will enable us to then have a ricochet effect of positive tipping points. Because this is the wake-up call for the future that we want and the future that we need. We are reaching those tipping points, as I said. It's the juxtaposition of the 3 C's: climate, COVID, and the conflict, not only in Ukraine, but in many other countries. Those multiple crises are creating pressure points. Now, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. I don't know if all of you are hearing an echo as well. Okay, it must just be me. We are, however, in the process of feeling that need for transformation and the greatest economic reset that we have had in recent years, where governments are rethinking what type of economies do we need, how do we build in resilience. We've seen the value chain shocks and therefore have learned that we have many unholy alliances here in Europe and across the globe. These dependencies are creating difficulties in the way in which we can build the future that we truly need within finite boundaries. Juxtapose that with the geopolitics that we just heard about this morning and the deep pain that we're seeing in Ukraine, the misunderstanding that many of us have in terms of why are we seeing this positioning between China and Russia, which we saw this beautiful interaction on the panel around how do we unpack that new world order and what does it look like. And by the way, we didn't talk about petrostates and the power games that we're also seeing in the Middle East, which we should juxtapose on that as well. But then by the same token, here comes the beauty of the human spirit, the activism that we've seen in our streets coming from the youth, the frontline activism that we see from so many women who stand up for the loss of their children, who stand up for the way in which their husbands and their partners are fighting wars that seem totally senseless. The bravery of these incredible women, the bravery of racial injustice and the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Me Too movement. And here in Europe, we have an opportunity, not only through the new Green Deal, but the way in which we interact with the Green Deal through the need for social, new thinking through a social deal that will enable us also to bring the green with the social in order for us to deal with the inequity that we see before us. Because it is the social tipping points, ladies, that will actually probably be the greatest existential risk before actually the deep environmental tipping points that we're already starting to see. And that is why we need to bring together the mass movements, the political progress, the market forces, some of which we will talk about today, as well as technological disruption, in order to make this the fastest positive transition in history to create the future that we want and we need, which is a zero carbon future, a zero loss of nature future, a zero poverty and zero pandemic future. That is why, as we reflected as the Club of Rome on what has come out of the Limits to Growth, even though there were 30 million copies sold, and the fact that we're still in this mess, and that we predicted the mess 50 years ago, that we needed to understand what then is our alternative future. What is the future that we can hold on to and co-create together? And what is the role of women within that future? We have to shift from the limits to growth to understanding the planetary boundaries and the science that is basically saying it's too late, and get into an Earth4All narrative. That narrative is based on the fact that we need to transform our economics. It is not enough to bring forward new technology. It is not enough to think about decarbonization. We are in the mess that we're in because we have continued to push growth. Growth at all costs. A growth scenario that is based on GDP without any other indicator. We don't measure education. We don't measure access to social care. We don't measure access to Medicare. And yet, what did we learn through COVID? The most essential was to be able to feel safe, to have access to medicine, vaccines, to be able to be taken care of by a medical profession that was actually enabling us to have that access, and yet we don't measure it. How is that possible? We actually measure shareholder value in the over-financialization of the economy. The fact is that short-term profits enable for shareholder value to go up while we fire 10,000 people. Who takes into account the lives and livelihoods of those 10,000 and the strain that it puts on our economy? No one. So we have to shift from the extractive GDP-based economy that we have today. We have to understand that social and environmental externalities must be integrated into our national accounts and into our economy. We have to correct that inequity that we're seeing, not only between the North and the South. I come to you as a Belgian French woman having grown up in Palo Alto, California. Beautiful. Has anyone gone back to San Francisco these days? What do you see in the streets? Beggars, homelessness, the higher rate of suicide and mental illness we've ever seen, heroin addiction. People are leaving San Francisco because it's become a poop town, and we're not talking about Calcutta. How is that possible? Inequity is not just between the North and the South. Inequity is in every single country that we see today who is forgotten, and the leadership that has not taken into consideration the differentiator between those that have too much, who don't pay taxes most of the time, and those that are actually continuing to go under the poverty line, or just making it. We have to correct this inequity. And here come the 21st century well-being economists, and here comes their offer. By the way, spearheaded by 5 incredible women in different countries across the globe, 3 of which have now just stepped down: Finland, Scotland, and New Zealand. Women who showed empathy, by the way. Women who during COVID demonstrated that they had the strongest economies because they took into consideration what mattered. Economic indicators alongside societal indicators and environmental indicators. That is what 21st century economics is about, and that is the future that we need to create. We need to scale up this opportunity, and that is the systems change agenda that we put into place. Looking at 2 key scenarios: too little, too late, and the giant leap. Bringing in the key turnarounds that were going to get us from those scenarios into the giant leap scenario, the alternative scenario that takes into consideration these new economic paradigms. And if you look at the too little, too late scenario, what we're showing is that actually poverty reaches 0 around 2100. that social tensions rise this century. And by the way, the too little too late scenario is one that actually takes into consideration what we have today. And that global average temperatures are at 2.5 minimum, but probably will be much higher. If you look at what happens in the too little too late scenario in comparison to the giant leap scenario, the differentiator in well-being just continues to grow, which of course creates more conflict, which of course will create more migration. And by the way, we are all potential refugees. Let's stop thinking that the rest of the world, and only those in Africa, are refugees. Those who are living in Spain today will probably be moving from the south to the north of Spain and then to the north of Europe. And this could happen across the globe. So those tensions will continue to go up if we don't take care of them. And that is why we looked at the giant leap scenario. What does that look like? Actually, poverty reaches zero, and that means that all countries agree to make sure that we have $15,000 incomes per year, per annum, for each citizen. Now, that is a major revolution, I agree. But the fact is, we don't have much choice. Because if we don't start to understand proper wealth distribution, not only in countries, but also between countries, and this means looking at special drawing rights at the international level, it means debt cancellation, it means understanding how we reform the Bretton Woods institution, because as Alexandra said, today we need 21st century institutions that reflect the values of what we need today and take into consideration the challenges. Not this bullshit power play that we have every day. And ladies, I'm counting on you, all of you, including myself, to make sure that we ask for it. That's our role as women. Don't get caught up in the same games. So many of us have forgotten that empathy as we've walked up the career chain. So many of us have forgotten, actually, that we need to be women first and foremost, to address poverty, to address inequality, to address what empowerment truly means. It doesn't just mean more women on corporate boards. It means making sure that every woman has access to education, and every girl does too. That every woman and girl can actually see themselves in the future, but also that they are part of the decision-making future. Our turnarounds, working together, poverty, inequality, empowerment, food, and energy, will only cost us 2 to 4% of GDP per annum. That is pretty much the defense budget that we see today, and not even globally. This new policy narrative is the future that we need to ask for. It's been developed by world-renowned economists, stress-tested as well by economists coming from across the globe, not just the West. It's been put together through our system dynamic modeling, which indicates exactly what are the key challenges and how the interrelationship between those challenges can be solved. It does take into consideration sectoral shifts that are important for our survival, though, which means we don't just focus on technology for technology's sake. We focus on technology as a tool to service people, planet, and prosperity. When we look at energy and food, it is because we know that we're fully dependent on both, and we need to guarantee access to both at this crucial time. But it also takes into consideration this critical feedback loop, which is one that so many of our leaders have completely overlooked if you look at energy poverty today. The bad decision-making of Macron that led to the Gilets jaunes. Not realizing or thinking through what his new diesel tax would do to those that have the least opportunity to either fill up at the pump or to be able to drive from A to B. This is most important, and this is what we're living today. Understanding that social tension and populism, which we're seeing again across Scandinavian countries, as we see a shift within those countries, shifting from an egalitarian into a much more right-wing, fear-mongering type of government, is because of a bad understanding of where that fear comes from. A misunderstanding and not wanting to unpack the real tensions that will actually drive those social tipping points. So I'm going to finish with this, ladies. This is a unique moment in time, and we can do this. My heart goes to those in Ukraine who are right now suffering from the invasion. But by the same token, I am struck time and time again by the incredible solidarity that we've seen, and also within the Ukraine, the hope of rebuilding Ukraine to be a vision of the future. We've been contacted by the Foreign Affairs Minister, not the Environment Minister, about how we can work together to build a new Ukraine. By the same token, just to be clear, we also have just had our book translated in Chinese and was released on Saturday. And we've been told that there is a huge audience and that the viewings have already been remarkable. That gives me hope. It comes back to that level of understanding that it is people that must move leaders and call for the right leadership. So let's use the shocks, the multiple shocks that we have seen, to make sure that we respond to the urgency at hand, because this is a decade of action. And let's tap into the will of the G20 citizens that we tapped into, that actually they want a well-being economy. They want change. We have to bring them on the journey, not be naive, but remember to explain that there is too much bad news to justify complacency, but there's too much good news to justify despair. Thank you.